In our next discussion here, we're going to talk about a little bit more about political systems, and particularly about borders. We've had some discussions on this throughout the course, but borders are an important part of political systems, about understanding geography as well. Geography, a lot of study of it is on regions, and that is how to define a region, where the borders of it are, what the characteristics of a region. Borders are creations, political creations, that mark the boundary from one territory to another. It can either be a province, state, county, municipality, or a nation. And there are two types of borders, natural and artificial. Natural borders are most commonly used because they're easy to define. A particular river, or crest of a mountain, or edge of an ocean. They're fixed. They can be seen they're natural points. They can be seen easily. And you go to this map here, you see a lot of natural borders. For example, the border between the United States and Canada here in New England, that is defined by the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes. That's a natural example of a natural border. Even among the states, the Mississippi River is a boundary for a lot of states. It can also be the edge of glaciers. It can be particular rock formations. But they're all also artificial boundaries. Artificial boundaries are those defined by just measures of latitude and longitude. Example here would be, look at particular nations of Africa. A lot of straight lines on these borders. So with these boundaries, these are artificial boundaries decided by treaty and made and defined as a measure of latitude, longitude, and angles between certain points of latitude and longitude. Example, the border between Algeria, Mali, and Niger, and Libya and Chad, the border between Libya and Egypt. Those are natural, those are artificially defined borders. So why do we have borders? Why are borders important for countries, even within countries? Well, for one thing, determine ownership. So people can know who owns what, who has the rights to what laws are practiced in one side of this line or the other. People's rights do change from one country to another sometimes. Jurisdiction of who's responsible for enforcing certain laws, that is often defined by boundaries. Control resources. It is one thing, who do people vote for, but also who owns a certain mine, who owns a certain resource, certain grassland, any kind of resource, water source, oil, that is defined by boundaries. And sometimes these border disputes can be very contentious because you're talking about controlled resources. You're often talking about a lot of money, a lot of trade opportunities. Having access to the sea, that's been a big contention for a lot of countries. So they can have access to ports to bring products in and out of their country. Now, there are a couple of different little ideas of different boundaries here. The idea between enclave and exclave. Enclaves, little countries, can be a little country surrounded by a much larger country. Lesotho and Swaziland here in South Africa, those are enclaves. An exclave would be Kaliningrad. It's a bit of Russia, but it's separated by the border of Poland and Belarus. It's right here. It's part of Russia, but it's away from the rest of the mainland of Russia. And of course, there are many, many other examples. But borders can be defined in very different ways. For example, an elongated boundary. For example, this would be Norway. It has this long, jagged coastline that makes it for an extended, elongated boundary. Or Chile, a boundary between Chile and Argentina, that's an elongated boundary, several hundred miles. And it's also a natural boundary defined by the Andes Mountains. Compact boundary. Zimbabwe is an example of this. With Zimbabwe, in a small country, it has a fairly compact shape, fairly simple shape. Another example here might be Niger or Chad, fairly compact shape. These kind of combinations shaped, like Thailand. It's kind of compact shaped here, but it has this kind of long tail extending deep into the Indian Ocean. Fragmented boundaries, such as the Philippines, a lot of different little islands here. Boundaries between provinces and national boundaries kind of fragmented. Same thing with Indonesia. And the idea of the perforated boundary. Now, that would be South Africa. It has all these different little enclaves within it. Not all the territory here is controlled by South Africa. Some of them are controlled by independent kingdoms. Small enclaves within South Africa. Now, of course, we discussed the different political systems. You've got monarchies, you've got republics, communist, socialist, parliamentary systems, authoritarian systems. These nations are defined in different ways. We've got a nation. Nations are large extended groups of people who function as their own community. Slight difference between nation states. Usually it's the same thing. But a nation state is a large area with a defined boundary and recognized as its own independent nation. Its own community, free to make its own laws, make its own decisions. Nation state. Or state itself, simply the political entity. It doesn't necessarily refer to a subdivision within a larger country, but basically a political entity, the state, the government. State, it is basically synonymous with country. But again, there are some subtle differences between different types. Now, these are different from colonies or dependencies. Colony is a land that is controlled by an external power and usually used for this larger external power for people to come in and use it for resources or for settlement. A dependency is a smaller land, again, controlled by a larger external power. It is not like a colony. It is not independent. It is not free to make its own decisions. Um, but a dependency is just that it's dependent on the larger country to make to make decisions, to provide resources for it. Gibraltar, for example, it's a British dependency. It's not large enough to be its own country. Um, but they are British citizens and they have to rely on the British government for support. Rely on the British government for resources, for defense, for law enforcement, healthcare, and other issues. And that's just one example. Then that you've also got multi-nation, several nations combined into one. Example of that again would be the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Scotland, Wales, England. They're technically separate countries, but they're all united into one larger national government or part nation. Basically, a nation existing within a larger one, but still part of the larger nation. Also gives us another curious little idea here of the nation stateless. It's referred to an individual or a group, but stateless is a term for somebody who really doesn't have a country to call their own. They belong to a certain ethnic group. Their parents may have been citizens of a certain country, but they themselves do not have a particular country to call home. They're not a citizen of any country. So that is stateless, just without a home, without a country. And of course, another idea with nations and borders is the idea of being landlocked. No access to the sea. A lot of examples of this. Paraguay in South America, Mali and Chad in Africa, also the Central African Republic, landlocked. They do not have access to the sea. Now, it's not the same as not having water sources. They do not have access to the ocean. Arkansas, we have plenty of water, plenty of rivers, but we do not have direct access to the ocean. We do not have a border on the ocean. We can go down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico, but that's not the same. We have to pass through several states and pass through several jurisdictions to get to the Gulf of Mexico. So we're landlocked. Same thing here with the examples Paraguay and the Central African Republic, Botswana, Afghanistan, and be an example of being a landlocked country. So Mongolia, no access to the sea. Now, within these countries, all sorts of different ways they're organized. They can be subdivided into states, provinces, or just run from one central government. Sometimes even these different states and divisions or provinces, they have differing powers. States and provinces, usually part of what they call a federal state system. Or essentially, these states or provinces little subdivisions, they can act as their own country, but they aren't their own country. They're part of a larger country. The national government, the federal government, has control and has control over these states. Like I said, it's the federal and national government that makes decisions over foreign policy and things like that. Can states have more power than their national government? In some cases, in some countries, they do. It depends on the issue. For example, like the United States, the Constitution says no. The federal government is the last word in law. States and municipalities are subordinate to federal control. But within federal states, in the state system, these subdivisions, they have a lot of things they can do. Establish their own healthcare system, establish their own transportation systems, establish standards on how local governments are to be run, establish their own certain local statutes, establish school systems. Back in the United States, you see here within Arkansas, we have our university system, our own state university system. We have our own system of state highways. We have our own system of public schools with our own standards for hiring teachers and for standards for what are to be taught in Arkansas public schools. We have our own healthcare system. We have our own certain laws over such things as insurance, driver's licenses, properties, our own certain local tax system. And certain things that are simply the job of the state to take care of. Now, in some countries, I'd say the United States is the only one like this. You have USA, you have Germany, you have Canada, just to name a few. You have the unitary state. The unitary state, you still may have these subdivisions exist, but basically for administrative purposes. But in a unitary state, it is the national government that makes decisions over everything. Makes decisions over local streets and highways. They make the decisions over local laws and statutes. They make the decisions over education, healthcare, and everything else. All the things the state would do, it might be different from one state to another. In the unitary state, it's all the same. And all decisions made by the national government. Poland is an example of a unitary state. All decisions basically run from Warsaw. Ireland is an example of a unitary state. Yes, they have certain counties and subdivisions, but it's the national government in Dublin that makes all those decisions. All this is made on the decision of what works best for what country. And any kind of country, any kind of human organization, is a lot of trial and error. Then within countries, you have your cities. Your urban area versus your rural area. Urban area is settled, incorporated, rural area, unincorporated. Only a handful of people and very few services. You have your cities, your metropolitan areas. In a lot of countries, you have a core area. Basically, certain central areas. Central locations for distribution, for healthcare, for education, business, things like finance, things like that. There's usually your larger cities. Those are usually seen as more important than other parts of the country because you've got so many people living in these areas. Plus, even the outlying areas still have really depend on these core areas. For business, for trade, and for all these other services. Primate city. That is the largest city in the country. Sometimes that is the capital of the country. Not always. New York City, for example, that's the largest city in the country, 8 million people. But the national capital, Washington, D.C., has only a population of 700,000. There are a whole bunch of cities, population larger than Washington, D.C. Canada, Ottawa is the capital, but the largest city is Toronto. But you've got a lot of countries that basically the core area is the capital. Basically, it's the capital and the outlying areas. It's very common in smaller countries, basically, where most of the services, most of the business activities, education, healthcare is taken care of in the capital city itself. But the primate city, though, being the largest, but in the United Kingdom, London by far is the largest city, so it is the primate city, but it's also the capital. Same thing in France. Paris is the largest city. Madrid, the largest city in Spain, is the primate city. In Argentina, Buenos Aires, by far the largest city in the entire country. It's the capital. It's also kind of the core area. Basically, it's Buenos Aires and everything on the outskirts of it. Capital, AL, that's the city. That is the city where the government is housed and conducts its business. Legislative decisions, executive decisions, judiciary, investigative committees, police organizations, commissions, and everything, they meet in the Capitol. The building is a capital with no OL. You also have these very, very tiny little countries. The idea of the city-state. Luxembourg and Monaco are examples of this. Basically, tiny little countries. They are their own independent nation states, recognized as nation states. They are free and independent to make whatever decisions they want on whatever issue they want. But they basically aren't any bigger in size or population than a city. And so Luxembourg is an example, Monaco is an example, so on and so forth. So there, and other examples. Andorra is an example. Tiny little country in Europe. Liechtenstein. Basically, the core area, the primate city, the capital, basically all the same thing. So there are all sorts of different shapes and sizes of countries. And these shapes and sizes for all sorts of different reasons. But they're all generally agreed upon by international treaty. And they have all sorts of ways of being run inside of it, and all sorts of ways you define cities, the way you define governmental systems, and different ways you organize them. All part of understanding how our world works.